Welcome to Tax Notes Talk, a podcast from Tax Notes, the leading source of tax news, information, and analysis.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm David Stewart, Editor-in-Chief of Tax Notes Today International. This week, Majority View. It's been almost a month since President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act into law, a massive tax package championed by Republicans in Congress. To get an insider's view of this bill, we've been sitting down with current members of Congress on the House Ways and Means Committee. Last week, we talked with Representative Stephen Horsford, the leader of the New Democrat Coalition's Tax Task Force. You can find a link to that interview in the show notes. This week, Tax Notes Capitol Hill reporter Katie Stanton interviewed Representative Adrian Smith, a Republican from Nebraska, to discuss the new tax law and the Republican Party's priorities. This episode is part of an ongoing series on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And as we continue to dive deep into the most important tax changes and provisions in the coming weeks or even months, we'd like to hear from you. If there's an aspect of the bill that you'd like to hear more about, please email us at podcast@taxanalyst.org. Now, I should note before we get started that due to some scheduling issues, we had limited time with Representative Smith, but Katie made the most of it, and let's go to that interview.
Congressman Smith, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
I know you and your colleagues have been working on this tax-focused reconciliation bill for months, if not years, leading up to the bill's passage and the scheduled expiration for large swaths of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Could you talk a little bit about the culmination of that work and what you were able to accomplish in this bill?
Well, the bill, as you said, it's a result of many years of preparation. Of course, I even include the preparation that went into the 2017 TCJA. That was particularly important. And, doing our homework, I was asked to head up a financial services working group by then Chairman Dave Camp. And, all that process has been, I think, very instructive. And then certainly as TCJA was carried out and deemed to be very effective, that, even a lot of our Democrat colleagues supported that last year in a lot of those business provisions in addition to the family provisions.
One aspect of the bill that changed between the House and Senate versions leading up to final passage was the treatment of clean energy tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you think the changes that were made in the final bill are set in stone, or is there any appetite to maybe go back and adjust the phase-out set by the bill, either with more or less severe restrictions?
Well, I suppose we could relitigate a lot of things that we do, but I think it's important that as we do move forward, well, number one, there's, I would say, a lot of controversy on, say, wind and solar, and not just the tax credits, but the actual construction of those projects in various jurisdictions, and certainly my district included. So, like building solar farms in the middle of hail country, that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when so many taxpayer dollars are involved as well. I try to keep an open mind as to how we can think about innovation moving forward. Obviously, the sustainable aviation fuel that has shown some promise. So I try to look at everything on their merit, all the issues on their merit, and take them one at a time. But also, passing legislation should have some meaning moving forward. And I would imagine that there will be an effort to change that at some point. But I would have a hard time thinking there would be a lot of support for something that's much different than what we passed.
Pivoting more to the international tax side here, Section 899, also referred to as the revenge tax, made a lot of news when it was included in the House bill and subsequently removed following the announcement about this agreement between the U.S. and other G7 countries. How do you see the future of that kind of retaliatory tax measure? Is there a chance it returns depending on how work with the OECD progresses or faces hurdles? How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think, we heard a message from our trade partners, for example, or other countries, friendly countries, certainly, that they want to cooperate with us. We don't want U.S. companies penalized. And I think we want to send that strong message. So we'll see, keep our options open moving forward, depending on how other countries and what their posture ends up being as we do move forward.
Kind of staying in that area, you also serve as the chairman of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade. Could you speak a little bit to how, your caucus and your party were able to balance addressing international tax in the bill and the knowledge and ongoing tariff plan by President Trump that was, occurring at the same time?
Sure. I mean, there's such a stark contrast in terms of trade agenda. The Trump administration, even going back to the first administration, a very vigorous trade agenda that was interrupted by President Biden, who didn't really have a trade agenda. So, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I understand they're a tool in the toolbox. I certainly would not want to codify tariffs in the law. Yes, some are saying that to deliver some revenue that we could work with on other parts of legislation. But I think as the president moves forward, we've seen other countries now coming to the table. I was told not that long ago by the UK that agriculture was just not within reach. That is changing. I'm happy to say that posture seems to have changed. We have seen a good bit of movement in the right direction, beef and ethanol being a couple of those things that have shown very positive developments. So as the president continues to negotiate trade with other countries, I think the president understands that for something to last beyond his administration, Congress will need to codify that. And I think that's to be expected. We'll see how those agreements come together. But I appreciate the fact that trade is a priority. I think we suffered greatly when trade was not a priority under the previous administration, especially when President Biden had an opportunity to do more and chose not to. And especially it's a little bit rich as we hear the opposition to say President Trump's proposed tariffs. The Democrats are opposed to that and yet chose not to do anything when they had full power to do so. Well, on that topic and maybe a few others too. But I'm not a fan of codifying tariffs in statute. Let's have the president negotiate a deal, and then should there be the votes in Congress to codify that moving forward, that could be a good opportunity to establish good trade partnerships around the world.
One provision that wasn't able to hitch a ride on this bill is a tax agreement with Taiwan, which, has previously passed the House but not made it through the Senate. Is that something that you think might be able to get over the finish line this Congress? And, how much of a priority is it for you and, other House tax writers?
Well, I think that issue has had some bipartisan support. I go back to when then Speaker McCarthy led the gathering with the president of Taiwan in California at the Reagan Library, incidentally. That was a very bipartisan event. I certainly told my Democratic counterparts that I appreciated their participation with that. So there's good bipartisan agreement there. I would think it's something that can be addressed moving forward.
Last week, we spoke with your colleague on the tax committee, Representative Horsford, about the new Democrat coalition's tax priorities. From your perspective, how would you articulate Republicans' main tax priorities, especially within the context of what you've recently advanced with the One Big Beautiful Bill?
I would say freedom and opportunity. Opportunity for everyone. When I look at the various parts of the bill, that there's something for everyone, and I think that when we want to encourage investment and productivity, that's what we saw very successfully done with TCJA. So we want to see that moving forward as well. I know that there was a lot of discussion. My colleague, Mr. Horsford, he was talking about people making $2.13 an hour. I want the record to reflect that doesn't happen. Tips are involved. Yes, a tip wage, but an employer must ensure that an employee must be paid the overall minimum wage, not just the tip minimum wage at the end of that pay period. So I want the record to reflect that. The president had his priority: tax relief for tip earners, tax relief for seniors, and we had the guardrails of reconciliation that we had to work with, say Social Security aspects and so forth. So we weren't able to, have full reign over all that policy. But I think we settled on a really good place that offers tax relief for hardworking Americans, and I think they will feel that very soon.
I know lawmakers and reporters alike are still kind of catching their breath a bit after this reconciliation process, but now that it's been a few weeks, can you speak to what House Republicans' next tax priorities might be? And are there any tax provisions that didn't make it into this bill that you're hoping to maybe go to bat for moving forward?
Oh, there's some things that they're not the really big items, but I think we want to be mindful of hearing from our constituents. You know, what is appropriate and moving forward, and what is most useful, helpful. So the bill, it was large. It certainly contained a lot, and I think it will be very good for our economy and opportunity workers. Great for wage earners. When you see how effective our efforts were in 2017, where wages grew faster at a higher rate than executive compensation. Of course, then we saw inflation kick in because of some policies. Gosh, I would hope that we would see more bipartisan interest in getting us back to those really good places before inflation. And let's avoid the policies that trigger inflation and be able to, see workers do well once again.
What kind of vehicle for maybe a few other provisions do you imagine might come next? Could there be more reconciliation bills this Congress? Would it be, some other kind of vehicle for moving tax priorities forward? What are you kind of imagining?
Well, there is the discussion that has just begun to start over what a second reconciliation package might look like. And I want to keep an open mind there and generate the conversations that need to take place before we get something like this done. I think back in January, say, when there was the debate over is it going to be one bill or more, and I think as Chairman Jason Smith really emphasized that the single bill was the best strategy moving forward. I certainly supported him on that argument as well. Some of the immigration issues, I don't think we were expecting illegal border crossings to be down some 90%, even without any new legislation in place. So let's see how things move along here in the next few weeks, next couple of months, to see what might be necessary moving forward. I'm always interested in what we can do to reduce bureaucracy. I see growing agencies that are not delivering a more efficient product, and that should concern all of us, certainly as taxpayer dollars are involved in supporting the bureaucracy. But then, the opportunity cost. What are some of those opportunity costs that are taking place because of the bureaucracy pushing back on innovation or new ideas that don't seem to fit well within some bureaucrats' minds who have a great deal of authority.
You mentioned bureaucracy and government agencies there. How do you think your caucus plans to treat IRS policy this Congress, both in terms of funding for the agency and other areas, perhaps the direct file program, which I know is something you've spoken to before?
Right. I think the direct file, that speaks for itself in terms of what we've already done. When you really break down the cost of how much each tax return is, that's a great example of the bureaucracy not being efficient. So I think overall customer service at IRS is something that's been on my mind, and I think many of my other colleagues' minds as well. Rather than just trying to throw all of these enforcement agents out across the economy, which that didn't even pan out even when they had the resources to do that, couldn't hire enough people and so forth. I think if the IRS took a really good, effective posture at customer service, I think compliance would follow suit, and I think taxpayers would certainly be more pleased as they seek to have their questions answered, as complex as they sometimes can be.
House Republicans have obviously already targeted some rollbacks for IRS funding and annual appropriations, as well as rollbacks from the large amount of funding the agency got from the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you have any concerns about the impact on customer service or on taxpayers who are filing, given those rollbacks and changes in funding, alongside, what is a shrinking number of personnel at the agency?
Well, I need to be convinced that new technologies have been employed before just adding a long list of full-time new employees. And again, I mean, it's hard to find employees these days. That probably begs a broader conversation. But IRS is similar to other bureaucracies that I think can be distracted, that doesn't seem to even really want to use newer technologies. So I want to be mindful of what and have these discussions of how can we see the IRS be more efficient in carrying out their responsibilities. Their work is important. Let me be very clear. Their work is very important. And we know that important work like that can be more effective with good, positive customer service and responsiveness to taxpayers, like I said, so that they can get their questions answered. Because especially with changes in the tax code moving forward, we just want to make sure that customer service is high priority at IRS.
One other aspect of tax policy you mentioned is maybe some bipartisan work. I've heard a little bit about the idea of a bipartisan bill maybe at the end of this year for some tax extenders, and I know there's a couple of unaddressed bipartisan tax measures like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit and Affordable Care Act premium tax credits that, there's been some conversation around. Do you think there's the appetite there, both across the aisle and within your caucus, to kind of work together on some kind of tax bill at the end of this year or even just sometime this Congress?
Well, I always remind folks that there's far more bipartisanship that takes place on the House side, probably the Senate side as well, than really gets covered. And so I think there's bipartisan interest here. Let's see what the issues are. I also, though, think that it's important that as extenders are proposed, what is the exit strategy? Is it permanent policy, or is it, letting something sunset? Let's, sort those issues out. I think, we need to have those discussions, and we shouldn't shy away from these conversations that do need to happen.
Great. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for joining us, Congressman. We really appreciate your time.
You bet. Have a good day.
That's it for this week. You can follow me online at TaxStew, that's STEW, and be sure to follow at Tax Notes for all things tax. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for a future episode, you can email us at podcast@taxanalyst.org. And as always, if you like what we're doing here, please leave a rating or review wherever you download this podcast. We'll be back next week with another episode of Tax Notes Talk.
Tax Notes Talk is a production of Tax Notes. You can learn more about us by visiting www.taxnotes.com/podcast. When major media wants the straight story, they turn to Tax Notes. Thank you for listening, and join us again for another edition of Tax Notes Talk. Tax Analysts, Inc. does not provide tax advice or tax preparation services. Nothing in the podcast constitutes legal, accounting, or tax advice. A full disclaimer is included in the transcript.